On April 8, 2026, diplomatic efforts in Islamabad reached a terminal impasse. Chief U.S. negotiator J.D. Vance exited the peace talks without a deal, effectively concluding the window for a negotiated settlement. Within hours, the United States military initiated a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, physically obstructing one of the world's primary energy corridors. Tehran responded by establishing a counter-blockade in the same waters, trapping commercial transit. This dual blockade triggered an immediate reaction across international markets. Equity indices dropped and energy futures surged as the reality of a severed maritime artery registered with investors. These events represent the culmination of a multi-stage strategy aimed directly at regime change. Reconstructing this global disruption requires tracing the military blueprint, the integrated cyber execution, and the diplomatic collapse that made this outcome inevitable. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz marked the transition of a regional conflict into the targeted weaponization of global trade choke points. The path to this escalation began with the 2024 embassy strikes in Syria and the subsequent 2025 12-day war, which established the precedent for direct confrontation. Following that exchange, the U.S. administration and Israeli leadership held a series of strategic briefings that redefined the conflict's objectives. Israeli leadership presented a maximalist escalation plan, advocating for a transition from regional containment to the dismantling of the Iranian state. This four-part plan focused on decapitation of top leadership, degrading power projection like the Revolutionary Guard and proxies, triggering a popular uprising from internal pressure, and finally installing a secular leadership to govern a post-clerical Iran. This posture was echoed by the U.S. Secretary of War, signaling a whole-of-government alignment behind this aggressive strategy. By adopting this blueprint, the U.S. and Israel shifted their primary objective from regional containment to total regime change. The operational execution of this plan began with a series of coordinated strikes inside Iranian territory. Allied forces deployed a fully integrated multi-domain attack, treating cyber operations as primary kinetic strikes rather than support functions. Early operations successfully targeted and disabled Iran's cyber headquarters, neutralizing its ability to respond in the digital theater. This resulted in nationwide internet blackouts, engineered to disrupt state media broadcasts and sever military communication channels. This digital paralysis isolated the Iranian command structure, preventing a coordinated response as the physical offensive began. Simultaneously, kinetic strikes across the region began degrading proxy capabilities to prevent them from opening a second front. This regional campaign prioritized the dismantling of Hezbollah's command structure in Lebanon. These strikes fractured local political stability, forcing the Lebanese government to distance itself from the Iranian-backed militia. This multi-domain approach was designed to dismantle Iran's defensive architecture systematically before any diplomatic discussions could occur. The April 2026 Islamabad talks were a direct extension of this military reality. A diplomatic resolution was structurally impossible from the outset. The United States maintained a demand for unconditional surrender and regime change, leaving no space for mutual compromise or face-saving exits for Tehran. When the talks failed, the conflict moved into the weaponization of international trade routes. The Strait of Hormuz is a global bottleneck for 30. The blockade effectively froze that volume. Energy markets spiked, with oil exceeding $100 per barrel, and it simultaneously severed the global fertilizer trade. For global agricultural hubs, this transit freeze represented an immediate threat to crop yields and food security. Commercial shipping caught in the street faced direct kinetic threats, with several tankers struck and disabled during the initial exchange. The collapse in Islamabad expanded a targeted regime change operation into a global market disruption that penalized neutral nations through their energy and food supplies. This expansion of the conflict forced an immediate realignment of global political priorities. The strategy of multi-domain warfare and maritime blockades placed unprecedented strain on traditional Western alliances. The UK and several European governments explicitly distanced themselves from the operation, citing the extreme risk to their domestic stability. European capitals framed the escalation as a foreign war, seeking to insulate themselves from the economic fallout and the resulting energy crisis. For neutral powers like India, the crisis necessitated a diplomatic high-wire act. As a massive energy importer, New Delhi was forced to secure its national energy interests while navigating the blockade and the competing demands of the US and Iran. This strategy inadvertently isolated the US and Israel, as global powers prioritized economic survival over historical security partnerships. While the kinetic theater of the war remained regional, the economic damage refused to respect national borders. Weaponizing international maritime choke points generates a macroeconomic contagion that distributes its costs across the entire global supply chain. Attempting regime change via multi-domain force is demonstrably incompatible with the maintenance of 21st-century global economic stability. The 2026 Iran war demonstrates that while military theaters can be localized, the cost of modern war is inevitably distributed globally.